First question down here.
Hi, yeah, I'm just kind of wondering for a developer who wants to make a web app, so let's say, you know, an ASP.NET backend, but also wants to have it compatible with Windows Metro or the Windows 8, so you can make it very easily into a live tile, but at the same time you have something that can deploy very quickly or easily on an iPad.
Okay.
And how does that work into the current tool set or tool chain?
Yeah, that's probably me.
So Rick can handle that one there.
Okay, so
rephrase the question for the cameras and then fire away there.
yeah, so if I understand you right, the question is, how can I build my back end, a nice flexible back end that's going to deliver rich information, and then my front end is effectively platform independent. So I want the same front end, probably looking different, because I'll be banging on about that later, on my iPad, my Android, my Windows 8 app, and my live tile. The straight answer to that is that it's actually really easy. So there's a lot of tooling in the Windows 8 development tools for you to hook straight into web services, to pull the information down from your web service and squirt it into the really nice sort of grid and tile view controls that you've got. And then you as a dev can hand that fairly raw working UI to your designers, and depending on what skill sets you've got, either they can modify the XAML and change the user interface and make it beautiful, or they can modify using CSS3 and SVG. The live tile's a little bit different. You've actually got to write some code for the live tile, and you've got to put certain, I believe, calls in your web service to send information back and forth. But again, that's all well documented. It's not terribly difficult. Design.windows.com and MSDN will give you everything you need to know for that one.
Okay. So to summarize, put my own little bit of a spin on that, HTML is absolutely one of the first-tier development languages for Windows 8 apps. So you can actually write native apps in HTML. Now that is, you know, you're writing a native app. It is slightly different from writing a website. However, there's a tremendous amount of overlap in the skill set and a tremendous amount of reuse. But I would look at, you know, what are we doing purpose-built for the Windows device, and what can we reuse from the website. So, next question. Question back here in the back.
Hi. Windows 8 at the moment seems quite consumer focused. I don't know if that's true to say. I wonder, is for the enterprise, if you're thinking of something that's like a kiosk application where you want maybe an ARM device that's locked down just to run your one app in full screen, is that a long way away, or is that?
So I'll go ahead and field that one, which is, I mean, we're not. Right now, there is a lot of the development and a lot of the push is on the consumer side of things. We're not in a position to talk about future roadmap things like a kiosk mode and those kind of things. At the moment, with Windows 8, out of the box, there's not a kiosk mode. The apps do run in full screen mode, and so it is possible to run that in full screen. But we're not talking about an embedded or a kiosk version of Windows 8 at the moment. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Can I just add there, from an enterprise perspective, we've got a fantastic story for you with the way that you can deploy your applications across your users within your organisation. You have a great deal of control over that. So you can write bespoke apps which you deliver just to your users within your domain. As far as enterprise is concerned, it's a really strong, it's a really great story there. Everything that was brilliant about Windows 7 is still there within Windows 8. All of your desktop applications are still going to run. You still have increased security. You've got increased performance with that as well. So don't think of this as just a consumer operating system. It's an operating system which scales across devices, across people, be they at work or be they lying on their sofa with a tablet.
Okay. So, quick question for Bill. This is a Twitter question from Mark Allen. Are good designers just born that way, or can anyone learn to do it, i.e., developers? Because this is one of the things that, you know, we're seeing a lot of developers doing front-end UI, and well.
So that's a tricky question. There's a Canadian novelist, her name is Margaret Atwood, and she was at dinner. And there was a brain surgeon sitting beside her at dinner, and they were both a certain age. And he said, you know, I'm just about to retire, and I'm going to become a novelist in my retirement. And she turned to him and said, well, that's really interesting. I'm going to retire and become a brain surgeon. I think that it's really important to know the difference between literacy and expertise. I think that UX design is a distinct profession with the distinct skills that take as big of an investment to be good at as does being a developer or a brain surgeon. So can you become a professional designer? Having had, well, it depends what your background is, but I'd suspect that it would take about as much work to do that as it would take somebody who went to design school to become a systems programmer that you would trust your development for. And I'm not dismissing any of this. It's just it's really hard to be good at something. It's a full-time job. And everybody knows that people can write code after taking a one-term course, Introduction to Programming, and after 1 year you can actually start to know elementary data structures and actually write code and do things. But that's a very different person. You want to be doing the fundamental architecture for a large system that your entire company's future depends on. So it depends on what level of expertise. I would argue that for us to work, we absolutely need literacy about each other. So if you're a designer, you need good literacy about developers and about the business side of things. The business people need literacy on the other two, and the developers need literacy on design and business. And then you have a common language, common ground. But unless you're planning to go back to school and study professionally, it's really hard to get the depth of knowing who is Dieter Rams, who was Ivan Sutherland in terms of what they do. And I would love it if people actually did make the crossover. It's possible to do. And in some cases, you can't afford to have a deep professional in each of the three things. So you do need hybrid people, but it's a real challenge. The challenge that design UX people have is to really not only perform, but be perceived as performing at the same depth of skill and expertise as the other disciplines. When we can achieve that, then we will be taken seriously as distinct professionals, and our opinions on the matters within our purview will be respected. And I think it's an evolutionary stage right now, and we do the best we can. So I'm not sure that's an answer, but it's an observation about how to think about the answer.
Absolutely. That's great. Anybody else have any comments on that? No? Okay. Question down here.
Yeah, maybe to take that up and put it to the rest of the panel, you're talking about design literacy. What's the language that you're now constructing that's going to share? What are the terms now that are buzz terms or necessary terms to work in this particular space?
By buzz terms, as in the terms that we're using internally at Microsoft, or terms that we're seeing in the world in general?
It's a Microsoft day, yeah, but touch and pinch and zoom, that kind of thing, tiles, the terminology that you're popularizing now. So what do I need to know?
What do you need to know? I'd say that I think as it comes with any platform that you're trying to deploy to, the secret is to just use it, and use it as often as you can. Try and use it in your day-to-day practice.
You don't have a glossary today.
There's definitely got to be a glossary on how complete it is at dev.windows.com or design.windows.com for all of your design or development needs. That's the first place I'd recommend to go. There's glossaries there for all of the individual controls that you can take part of within your applications. Take a look at some of the build sessions from last year and look at maybe some of the sessions that come out of build this year. I think as far as glossary goes, the world of technology, the world of design, it's constantly evolving, it's constantly changing, and to keep a list of everything that's current is a very difficult task, if that skirts round the answer but doesn't answer.
Sure. So just to chip in on that one, as Andy said, there are certain things, certain terms you will find and hear and come across. So we'll use things like live tiles for the things on the front screen. There is a very specific set of slides, I don't know if Josh is going to show later, about the Windows touch language. There are no gestures. There are very specific things that they say you do if you like. You tap and hold to find something out. You tap to activate it.
Actually, I think I do have that slide later. Yeah,
So,
sorry.
And that I think you will need to bear in mind.
Yeah.
To a large extent, actually, certainly back in the office, we try and avoid a lot of those sort of buzzword terms. A, because frankly, you just end up playing buzzword bingo and it's a pound in the pot. B, because it's annoying. And C, because it just gets confusing. You know, talk in plain English. What do you want your users to do with the app? How do you want them to explore it? How do you want them to find it? There is a glossary of terms for Windows, but actually for Windows 8, it's a fairly small glossary of terms for the new things that are in there. There's a wealth of information that you can carry forward from previous versions of Windows, and there's a lot of stuff in there that you'll find very familiar if you're a web designer or you're coming from developing from other platforms. So yeah, steer away from buzzwords is what I'd say.
Yep. So,
One quick comment. Yes. I just want to follow up my earlier answer with one other, so it doesn't sound so elitist. I'm not taking back anything I said. I just want to make one additional comment. Absolutely, somebody who's a developer can do great design. Mm-hmm. Generally, it's in an area that they're familiar with and they have an affinity to. In the same way that somebody who came out of high school has no computer science training can build a beautiful app from a programming basis. And so absolutely, those two cases, there's too many examples to ignore that and not only admire it and respect it. And so I want to qualify what I mean by a design professional, just as I would say as a computer science professional. And it means that if you have a hangover, your wife just left you or your spouse, the bank is foreclosing, and your dog bit you, and you haven't eaten for 3 days, that you can still go and do your job. Mm-hmm. And you hate the client and you hate the project, but you can still do a professional standard on the job without any muse or inspiration. A professional can do that on any project and apply their skills, and a professional programmer can get whatever you give them, they can deal with it. And they can, because they can draw on this deep history of experience and training to do it and overcome all of those obstacles. And I think that's true in design. And so it doesn't mean that you can't contribute or you can't do great work. It's just a question of how broad and generalizable it is. And that's the difference between when I talk about a design professional or a computer science professional. And that level, I'm happy to be an elitist because it also still encompasses incredible breadth of human creativity, yep. How it's manifest in diversity.
Yep. So there's a, I'm trying to remember who it was that has proven this out. It takes roughly 10,000 hours to become an expert at anything. And if you do it for 10 hours a day, every day of the week, for that's still 1,000 days. So that's a lot of days, a lot of time to become an expert in something. And the design professionals and some of the people on this panel have been doing that. So that'd be my answer to it. Actually, going back to the previous question about kind of the buzzwords and the lingo in Windows 8, I actually want to ask Kerry in particular because Kerry has recently started developing for Windows 8 apps and has done some beautiful work. And I just want to, what were the terms and lingo and things that you had to learn in order to come to the Windows 8 platform and do a design at that level?
Well, I basically, the website that Andrew mentioned there, the kind of design kind of forums and advice online was basically my godsend. I kind of referred to that on a 10-minutely basis to try and pick up the tools. The terms in terms of touching and tapping and pinching and zooming, they're all things to really kind of consider to like the nth degree for how your app's going to work. So like really strip everything back in terms of the content of the app, just to the point of how the user can, if it makes more sense to zoom or twist or slide to just find that information. It needs to go back that far. But yeah, I would say that the forums that have that list of information was definitely my kind of touch point. And obviously I would definitely confess to being an OS girl living in my own little OS world, so it was definitely a massive learning curve for me. I found that a great resource.
Okay, very good. All right, so actually, let's go to one more Twitter question here. So, where are we at? So Jonathan Heron, aside from your own sites, Bill, and eBay, what are the best resources for learning the history of interfaces and user experience?
Having smart people who aren't like you to be able to talk to. The whole thing is, we talk about social networks as being important, but the social networks of people who, heterogeneous social networks. The last person I want to talk to is myself or somebody like me, because they're just going to amplify my weaknesses. And so the part of building your career as you get older, and it starts right at the very beginning, and when you're at school, is building up the people who you trust who are different and respecting those differences. So, and so you can get different opinions. The quality of experience design is directly proportional to the breadth of the collective experience of the people who have input to the project. And so diversity is the key thing, and it has to be a diverse set of people who are respectful and understanding. And I think that's where it goes. There's a huge amount of craft as well as art in this too. And so if you have the luxury of a slightly larger team, is that I would definitely want to have people who can build physical models. I'd love to have people who, this is what I love about things like Arduino and things like that, and 3D printers and so on, is that if you can actually cobble stuff together now and just how quickly can you get to something that you can experience. And I don't care, even if you are a professional, you'll have competence in all that, but you won't be an expert. And so just that notion of respecting other skills and knowing you can learn from people, and then knowing who to ask to find out who to ask.
Yep.
And it's kind of like that, but the physical part's just part of it. I learned something just today. Somebody asked me just about, so what happens with my father, who's with his father, right? When it comes to these things, what are the issues? And you think, wow, that's a really interesting case. It's reality because it's human, and you start saying, okay, it gave me pause to think. What do you do about that for transferring skills and that? We keep thinking people are like us, and they're not.
Right. Okay, very good. So question back here in the back.
So now that Kinect is going to Windows and there are other devices similar like the Leap device, where do you see it will fit into the new generation of UX? Or will Windows 8 provide some libraries for that? How are we going to use Kinect with the Windows 8 app? Are we going to use Kinect with the Windows 8 app?
Okay.
I was going to say this is becoming a fairly common thing, isn't it? We're just bouncing the mic between the two ends. So we are doing things with Kinect. I'm also going to, since you're talking about other technology, I'd like to plug Pixel Sense because that's one that's dear to my heart. I think there's a real...
The device formerly known as Surface.
Yeah, the device, yeah, exactly. I'll apologise now for, I'll be cross-naming those later. I think it's actually something that's really important that, you guys are all creative people. You're developing solutions for organisations where they say, you know what, we want information radiators, we want things in our foyers, we want things for our exhibitions. And one technology is not the answer. You can do some incredible things, and we have done some cool things where you have a pixel sense with information and you flick something to the edge of the screen and it bounces onto the slate that you're carrying, and you take the slate to somewhere else and you flick it off the slate or hold the slate up and it suddenly appears on a projector, and then we can use Kinect. The great thing about Windows 8 for a developer is it's the same language, it's the same skills that you're going to use across the board for that. It's all .NET, it's all C# if you wish it to be. And you can develop your graphical assets and user interface assets and move them across the platforms. If you ask me, will there be specific libraries and specific guidance to design in Connect use, I can't answer that. If you ask me, is there scope for us as creative professionals to build that into our apps, to go the extra mile for our customers, I'd say absolutely, and you should do, because apart from anything else, it's jolly good fun.
Yeah. So just from a technical perspective, you can use the Connect SDK at the moment to create and deploy applications, desktop applications on Windows 8. As far as the roadmap for how that integrates within this new style of Windows Store application goes, that's not information I have. I've got my own opinions on how that works for people in the world, but maybe Bill's more qualified to talk about Connect from how we use it with tablet devices and how he sees it interacting.
Maybe not.
No, go ahead.
Oh no, I
That's why it might be more interesting. Why just Connect? I think if I was going to give you my advice in terms of where I believe the industry's going, it's great to have beautiful apps running on beautiful hardware and devices. That's fine. But when you've got the number of beautiful form factors that are populating your space with each one easy to use, with beautiful, elegant, easy to use, useful applications, the sum total of all of those devices and all those easy things still adds up to complexity that's beyond the normal human's ability to deal with. And I would say that social networks amongst heterogeneous devices is as important as social networks amongst heterogeneous people. And if any application you're making, at least consider how it could be augmented. If the person brings their mobile phone to it, can it seamlessly integrate? Here's how I think about it. I talk about this notion of society of devices. And I see the trends going forward being seamless aggregation of devices and apps and disaggregation with graceful augmentation of abilities that when they come together, but also graceful degradation as they come apart. So everything has value on its own, but when they come together, each device, 1 and 1 makes 3. That if I have my phone beside my slate, my phone augments the car augments my phone. I can use my phone as a hotspot for my slate, so I can actually get on the G4 network by just connecting it when they're that way. I'd like it to be more seamless, but we're getting there. But think about other things too. Think about your slate in combination with the whiteboard or your desktop. One of my favorite apps is just it's a hack that came out of internally, but it's just that lets me have my mouse on my desktop just slide across right onto the screen of my slate, so I can just use the slate and things like that. Can I drag things back and forth? How do you synchronize? I have a cloudette. What's a cloudette? Another word I invented. It's a diminutive cloud. Seagate makes this great little hard drive that has a 7-hour battery built into it, as well as a Wi-Fi router, so that you can actually have a cloud in your briefcase, so that your slate, your phone, and your laptop and your desktop can all access the same device wirelessly as a local cloud. It's what you call mist, right? That's what clouds are when they're really close. And they can either be fog.
We don't know anything about that here in Dublin.
Yeah, that's right. So you embrace it, right? But the point is that I'm just saying that look at the other things and leverage. That's where the real opportunities are. Everyone else is trying to make the killer app. You make the killer glue, the killer flux that lets all this stuff work together in an ecosystem, then you're golden. And you don't have to have it work at the beginning. Make your app so it stands alone. You need that first. But when you're designing it and conceiving of it, conceive of the hooks let that happen. I mean, everything you said, I just agree 100%. And then you can sort of say, connect as it's uses. That's one way you can know. How close are you? What else is there? Who's there? Can I just log on to one machine and everything logs on? How do you make those types of things? Those are all possible to do. We still have our work cut out for us as an industry. And let's be very clear. Your creativity and innovation in the apps you make and you conceive and how you can use this have in some ways more power in terms of influencing the industry and even Microsoft than I do, or any individual within the company, and that's the power. And it's if we choose to do it that way, but there's great opportunities. I think the overwhelming complexity, the accumulated complexity of a bunch of simple things, is the next thing that's going to kill us if we don't address it over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yep, absolutely. Just my one little take on this, and this is something I've been telling people for a while now, and I want this to come true, so I'm going to tell you guys, and hopefully somebody will make this come true. I want to walk into my house, and I want for some device, currently that technology would be Kinect, to see me, recognize, oh, this is Josh. He's in a good mood, so I'm going to put on a little rockabilly. I'm going to start queuing up TED Talks on his Xbox. I'm going to start, queuing up, Facebook and other things on his laptop. I want, start, brewing his favorite coffee, a light ground. That's what I want. I want that kind of an integration where when I just walk in, it immediately recognizes me, what kind of mood I'm in, and starts preemptively starting to do things for me, so I don't have to think about it. When I roll out of bed in the morning, I want it to see, oh, last night was a late night, so we need a nice fry up to help, look, he's going to the gym this morning, so we'll do Cheerios instead. That's what I want, and that's hopefully my science fiction future of the house. So. All right, so we're in our last 5 minutes or so. Next handful of little questions here. I'm going to ask one from Twitter, and then we've got a couple of umbrellas here in the back for questions here in the room. So question from Shakeman. Prototype wins over spec. What are the prototyping tools for Windows 8 that interaction designers can use? So, Kerry, you want to fire away with that one first?
Yeah, well, my knowledge of it is Visual Studio is a great kind of prototyping tool, especially for kind of emulating the touch functionality of tablets. If you only have access to things like laptops and like a desktop kind of function, so that's really useful. Other than that, don't I have any other?
One of my favourite things, actually, and something I tend to do at the very start of any project, is just get paper out. Paper prototyping. You can draw out the surfaces, you can draw up your application bars, you can draw in your flyouts, and you can use that then to run through each scenario that you're trying to support. As Josh has given you with these incredibly fine sketch pads. If you've got any spare, I'd like to take some home. But I like paper. I think it enables you to really quickly validate an idea. It means that you can screw it up and throw it away. You haven't lost a load of time that you've spent trying to create something into a digital interface. However, once I've got that, I then look to, there's some fantastic templates for Photoshop users, layered files that it's got all the controls in there, it's got the hardware in there, it's got the hands for pinch gestures. So if you're then looking to create something nice and polished that you want to give to a client in order to get them to agree and sign something off, there's some great tools there. Design.windows.com is a great place to go for this. Yeah.
He's going to hit me in a second. So I'm going to talk about this later on. Photoshop is great, but the thing I find if people design their apps in Photoshop is that, and this pad isn't helping, Josh, it's 1366 by 768. Our screens are not all that size. They're not all that resolution. One of the things that we find useful actually is if you've got a designer who's used to using Blend, who's used to using XAML, or you've got a web developer who's used to using CSS transforms, that kind of thing, build a rapid prototype of your UI without the code behind. And that's a great way of building something fairly lightweight to present to your client, to work within the team to see what works. You know, if a button changes from red to green, is that what we need to tell the user that something's happened? Do we need to do something cleverer? There's a lot to be said for that separation of sort of user interface and back-end program logic, and build that user interface lightweight first. Paper's great. I love paper prototyping. I love the fact, you sit down with a customer, you say, right, hit that button, close your eyes, change the piece of paper. There you go, something's changed. What do you think of that? It's great, it's low fidelity, it's quick, it's easy. Photoshop, I shudder when people talk about, just because I've seen the horror of, you know what the customer says, well, it didn't look like that in the thing that you gave me. So I'd probably shy away from that one.
Yep. So while microphone's going down, my one problem with XAML prototypes and CSS prototypes is then the customer says, oh, it's done.
Okay, there's an answer to that. So remember what I said about language being really important? Here's one of my rules. If you render the graphics or the look of your sketch or your prototype in a way that somebody can view as finished product, you deserve what you get.
Yeah.
Right? There's no such thing as high fidelity and low fidelity prototypes. There's just right fidelity. And what is the level of rendering that's appropriate for the task? So when I'm rendering stuff that there's these toon shaders that make stuff. You can even take the high resolution stuff and make it look like a cartoon. The graphical language should get the message across and should not have one bit of detail in it which is not essential for the purpose for which that prototype is intended to serve. I work with George Lucas. Man, if you put anything in a shot that wasn't necessary for the story, you were wasting money and taking resources that could have been put on the money shot that needed to be done that didn't have the resources. It's the same thing here. You're better to do not put, if you make something green when it doesn't need to be green, all you're doing is inviting the customer to say, why is that green? And you say, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. No, they're not stupid, they don't understand it doesn't matter. You're stupid for making it green. When it didn't need to be green, it wasn't important to the story. And then you can get going. Now the second thing is, with these representations, whatever level of fidelity, what's the question you're asking? In every prototype, what is the question you're asking? And until you really understand that and why and what are the parameters, you don't know what rendering technique to use. And when I say rendering, I don't just mean visual rendering. What typically happens, what we call storyboards in our industry, where we do these screenshots, and we call that a storyboard. No, that's not. That's a recipe for disaster, because you've got all the resolution there in the shots. That's static. It's not about the static thing. Here's my worst joke. What do Canada and transitions have in common? They're both dominated by the states. Okay? That's a state transition joke, get it? So if you don't have as much detail in your design at the earliest stages in the arrows that get you from here to there as you have in the landing spots and the departure spots, you're going to have this chunky thing that looks great in ID magazine when you photograph it and it feels like garbage. And furthermore, the engineers are going to start to build it the minute they see these things that look finished. And they're going to say, no, it's not supposed to move that way. And you say, but you didn't tell us that. It's too late. Whose fault is that? You did the dynamics. So among other things, I'd say one of the skill sets that I don't have, but that I would add in terms of, is get somebody who comes from game design or from animation, but interactive is good because games are just interactive animation, that they can come and actually, and an art director, creative director who can understand the flow and the squeeze and zoom on that sort of stuff. That's what made the iPhone successful. It wasn't the technologies, it wasn't the graphic design, it wasn't the chrome, it was the flow. And and we need tools. Now, there were some great tools, like SketchFlow was a really nice tool. And one of the things that really is interesting is as soon as you start to build code behind to make an operational or an experiential prototype, is you start to feel, well, we have to be able to use that code and repurpose it for the product and migrate the product. No. My choice would be, do not do that, because if you make it in the same language, then people will try to do that. You need freedom to write garbage code in terms of production that gives you brilliant flexibility to explore the interaction. Very different criteria. Don't overcode it. Don't try and evolve that way. And the final thing is to say, in terms of a lot of the stuff, you don't have to go to code. And since I don't get any royalties from the book, I'll feel comfortable promoting it. But there's a recent, just this year, there's a thing called the Sketching User Interfaces, whatever the heck I called the first book, but it's a workbook. It costs almost nothing. That's why we get no royalties, because we just want it, and it's just full of exercises. Just take your Friday afternoons after you've, go just huddle with everybody in the team and work through those exercises and get practice and build up your skill set, so you've got all these different skills that let you find the different techniques to render the ideas. And if you only have one rendering technique because you only know Flash or you only know Maya, then it's the old thing. If the only tool you got's a hammer, you're going to see the world as a bunch of nails. No, you need a full toolkit. And no individual is going to have the competence in the full toolkit, but within the team, you've got to have that full repertoire tools so that you choose the rendering technique because it's the right one, as opposed to the other one you know how to do. And just focus on that stuff and practice. That's the only way you get really good ideas consistently. It's like the piano. If you don't practice, you lose it.
Cool. So let's take a couple of quick questions in here. There was one down here, and Jonathan gets an umbrella. So while you're asking the question, I'll go get the umbrella.
I remember when I was growing up, my granddad said to me that the greatest technology of the age was going to space. He also said, following up to that there'd been no new innovations or inventions since then. This is back in the 80s. Would you agree that the rules that were laid down in the 60s and 70s are so well known they've led to a process of iteration rather than innovation? and it's the people who don't know the rules who are growing up now, they're going to be the people who are going to invent stuff and be the next great thing, rather than something that was actually invented 20 years ago.
Is that? Sorry, this isn't a one-man show. Give me an example. What's new?
There isn't very much that is new.
No, but whenever was there? Historically, in the history of technology, when was there something that was fundamentally new, as opposed to a recombination of existing subcomponents?
I think what he was trying to get at, and I think what I was trying to get at, was that there were no major leaps. Going to space was a major leap for mankind. It's a small step, great leap. Touch and the various iterations from the 70s haven't really evolved. They've become more fine-tuned, but there's been no great leap in...
I think what Bill was trying to get to is that it wasn't we've just invented going to space. We'd invented rocket propulsion. We'd invented ceramics that would withstand the great forces of heat. We'd managed to figure out how to get people to breathe in hostile environments. It was a combination of all of those pieces of technology which enabled a new situation. It's the same thing that we do with the sort of technology that we refer to today as technology. It's a fusion of current things that we already have. I think it's very hard to come up with new technology. I think what we do instead is we come up with new experiences for people.
So I get your point, but it's really interesting to say. What I'd argue what is going on there with these great things that happen, it's when somebody just put that last straw on the camel's back that took us over the tipping point, and then the thing caught. But they weren't doing anything different than the other people were. It's just it was that last straw, and we can plan those things as best. We can actually actively try and pursue that, but. The point I try to argue really strongly is that our attitudes about how this works can have a huge impact on our success of how we practice our art or our craft. And that is this: if we believe it's the light bulb going off, the Edison model of the genius stuff like that, I just don't believe it. I view it far more like prospecting, looking for it. The mother lode's there. It's sitting in the ground. I just portaged my canoe over it. I had no idea that underneath the Canadian Shield was a gold mine. Somebody will. It's sitting there, prospect, then learn how to mine it, then learn how to refine it, and then learn how to turn it in by goldsmithing into worth more than its weight in gold. If we believe that that's the process, every day then becomes a prospecting trick, and the genius comes in terms of quote-unquote lateral thinking. The de Bono type of thing is, where do you start looking for the sources and for where you start to prospect for the things that are critical that could help bring you over the top in terms of insights. But that's why knowing the literature, knowing the history is so important. It gives you something to draw on for inspiration, and that will trigger the idea of the new ideas. I think but it is generally drawing on what's there. I don't know anything that didn't take 20 years.
So that sounds like also like a great discussion to continue at drinks tonight. So make sure everybody sticks around for drinks tonight. Last question. Yes. And we also have an umbrella for you as well.
Thanks. It really follows on and buys into the things you're talking about in relation to histories and 20 years and the scale of development. But there's a real and emerging problem that I find on the ground in making apps work with people, and that is people working with apps. There's an inertia where there are people of a certain age who never had anything to do with computers and hold on to what they know for grim death. If you change the icons on their desktops to something that's different, the immediate reaction is hostile. It's completely, just dig into what I know and I'll get through this somehow. So while it's all very well to make things look lovely and make them look different, if they're significantly different, like the moving tiles and everything like that, they all look great, but they would spook most people who would try to move that away and find the thing that they click every Monday morning to run their report, the thing that they do. Is there, within the design of Windows 8 and the way that you see it, is there any kind of halfway house or something that they can see, as Bill was saying this morning, there's a jump that you can do that's worthwhile doing, so you take them there and then you take them fully? Is there anything that you can suggest to get people who won't move from 2003 to 2012 12 office windows or those kinds of things. How do you lead them? By design.
So I sort of grabbed the mic for this one because I have what I call my grandmother test. So my grandmother is 92. She's not terribly mobile. I got her a PC, it's plugged into the TV, so she can sit with a remote keyboard. She's also got a tablet. And I get really frustrated with exactly what you just said. Oh, I've changed the icons, things have moved. And it's because of two things. First of all, a lot of people are guilty of teaching people specific paths to do specific things in computing. They don't teach them the transferable skills, the willingness to explore. And the second thing is, we instill this fear in people that if they don't do it right, they're going to break it. And I think actually the biggest challenge for us who write apps is we've got to make our applications robust. If I put something in front of my grandmother now, she's learned that she can just sort of tap and poke and see what happens. Providing there are no detrimental effects, I think that's great. And once she's then into my application, I would start tackling it by, again, it's who's your audience. So if we're looking for people who are new to computing, who don't really know, if you like, the standard gestures or whatever, let's try and make our user interface mimic something they understand. A really great example of that is the Pixel Sense. So it's a touch tablet, but you can put objects on it, and most adults will come and they'll look and go, ooh, what's that? Kids will come up and hit it, because they always do. But if I put things on it, the adults will come and play with the things. And if the things then trigger stuff, they get excited and they explore. And so long as nothing breaks, they'll keep playing. And I think one of the tricks with building really great Windows 8 apps is it's making that user interface enticing and robust. And I think that the Sketch Paint app is a great example of that. I can jab my finger anywhere, it won't hurt anything, and beautiful things will happen, and it mimics finger painting. I think that's the way we've got to start thinking, the way we've got to design our applications now. I'm waiting for Bill to contradict me again.
No, not at all. I'm curious. Again, I'd rather hear what you have to say.
Well, I would say coming from the Mac world, the desktop kind of will still exist, very similar looking to how it would exist, not as far back as XP, but it's only really the start menu that has this kind of live tile kind of new interface that is the new era. And I personally think it's obviously just a more engaging, content-driven way to navigate your way around your device, your machine. So there's still elements that are familiar. It's not all, as we saw the example there earlier.
I saw someone the other day, and they still had their running Windows 8. They had their desktop, and on their desktop had a shortcut to every single program that they had on their start screen. So it was just what they needed to do was just get their mind set around that it's just a shift in. It's the same way of doing. It's a new way of doing the same thing, essentially. I've been running Windows 8 for about a year now. I went back to a Windows 7 machine a couple of weeks ago. I didn't like it. I didn't want to be there. I think once you start using it, once you start embracing it, and you've learned a couple of the simple things that get you going with it, at the same time you change any operating system, be that on your phone, on your desktop machine, even your fridge, your microwave, whenever you change something that you feel you know, there's a learning curve for it. But once you know it, you rarely want to go back.
On the integration with Windows 8 to, let's say, iPhone and so on and so forth, is it only for iPhone and HTC, or can it be used on the smaller internet phones? Like somebody that's using Opera Mini, maybe.
I'm sorry. Was that?
You were talking about Connect earlier on.
Yeah.
Right, and most of the applications that are out there now are all either iPhone or HTC. For people who haven't got that type of phone, right, can it be used on, let's say, a Facebook phone, for instance, that just uses Opera Mini? You haven't got touchscreen or anything.
Okay, I'm not sure on that one.
I was going to say, I think that's more of a different question, isn't it? That's more of a web design, web application question where rather than building a rich Windows Phone app or a rich Windows 8 app, you're building a website that will work across platforms. So when you talk about HTC, I'm guessing you're talking about Android. If you're talking about iPhone, you're talking about iOS. Now, there are a number of development tools that are emerging that will allow cross-platform development, but there's no great panacea for that. I mean, it's something we've been looking at as a company, as our customers are saying, well, hey, I want a Windows Phone app, I want an iOS app, I want an Android app. And the second thing they say is we want them to look the same. And we go, no, because they shouldn't. If you put an Android interface on an iPhone or an iPhone interface on a Windows Phone, you've broken that experience for the person who chose Windows Phone. I used to love my iPhone. I really did, because I hated Windows Phone 6.5. And then I moved to Windows Phone 7. And my wife still got an iPhone, and I can't use it anymore because I'm so used to that dashboard of the Windows Phone. But when I open a web page, that's different, and the web page should be the same experience on any device. We might want to use things like responsive design, graceful degradation, progressive enhancement to change the bells and whistles on that page, depending on what our phones can do. But I think that's a very different conversation than how do I make my dedicated application live and breathe Windows Phone or Windows 8 or Android or iOS. Is that?
Just as well, if any designers are kind of familiar with designing for iPhone or iOS and Android and the like, I personally found that the navigation was very kind of icon-led with those kind of platforms. Whereas what's really nice with Windows 8 is that it's very the navigation is very content-led. So it's almost like when you're within your app, you're not looking for icons of like news being like some kind of newspaper icon, and then that opens all the latest news or whatnot. It's actually kind of stripping back all the content that's within your app to its kind of purest form, and being able to, working out from a design perspective how to visually display that in the most kind of engaging way for the app users. We've lost everybody.
All right, so we're trying to figure out the projector. There's a little glitch with the projector. So we're going to take one more question, and then we'll move on. So, yep.
The emphasis seems to be for apps to consume their data on the fly, and less of an emphasis on local storage. Is this a deliberate thing from Microsoft? And as well as that, the search contract is an extremely powerful feature that they've introduced. And if local storage is being used, and this transfers to the phone applications as well, if local storage is being used, is there any way that the search contract can expose the data held in local storage, like local DBs on desktop and iPhone or on Windows Phone?
So I'll throw in on the first question. There are two questions there. Yes, we are pushing towards a more cloud-connected environment where, and there's some fairly strong reasons for that. There's a study done by the IDC where the average affluent male in the United States has got a minimum of 6 devices. And I started looking at that and thinking, that sounds like a lot of devices. And then I started looking, okay, I've got 2 tablets, I've got a laptop, 3 laptops, and a desktop. Then I've got 2 phones, I've got my, I've got 2 Xboxes, I've got a media center, and all of a sudden you start looking at this and I've got so many different devices. And now which one am I on at any given point in time? And I want, not necessarily, I mean, as Bill said earlier, I don't want consistency of experience across all of them, but I do want my data, and I want my settings, and I want it to know that it's me. And I want that on every single device that I pick up. It doesn't have to be exactly the same user interface, but I still want that same data that still, I want to understand the context that I'm in and be ready for me when I come into that. And so, yes, we are absolutely pushing for more of a cloud-connected environment, and selfishly, as I have so many different devices, I'm excited about that.
But in terms of offline local storage,
Yep, absolutely.
very little there at the moment for situations such as if you're on an aircraft or we're an airline, we're developing applications for the cockpit,
Right.
where it can't be connected at that time, but we still
So
need
there's
access to the
absolutely
storage.
nothing that stops you from storing everything local, okay?
But
And
there's
then
no
roaming
relation-
settings.
But there's no local relational database.
I use SQLite.
So, yeah, but there's
and it
no
works great.
Microsoft product.
Does there have to be a Microsoft product?
Well, no,
In order,
we were wondering what
the question for everybody else was there's no Microsoft product for local database storage, and there doesn't have to be a Microsoft product for local database storage. SQLite works great. XML files work great. I mean, there's lots of local storage options. And so, back to your other question around search, you can absolutely search across the local storage as well as through the cloud. It's up to you to implement the search provider. So,
For searching local database, now using the search contract will be totally different to searching local storage. Like searching local storage would be quite straightforward.
yep.
And
But there are already apps, lots of apps that use the search contract on the local device. So
To
you know
search-
what?
to
Let's
search-
take that offline.
Okay.
I'll show you. Grab me at lunch, and I'll show you a couple of apps that already do that, and then and we can talk more about the specific scenarios. Suffice to say, you can with the search contract, you can search local storage, local databases, internet. You can search. I mean, you can search your pockets if you have an interface to it. So fire away. Okay. All right. So with that, sorry I hogged that last question, but let me thank my esteemed panel here. So Rick, Andrew, Kerry, and Bill, thank you.